Well, good morning, Alan.
Good
How are
morning,
you?
Mark. I'm doing
We
well. How
are
are you?
we're doing fine. We're two voice devs.
We're two voice devs.
It's Monday morning. On my time, it's a little bit later. I guess it's still morning in New York, um, but middle of November. So, what have you been working on?
Mostly these, well, this weekend actually was dedicated a lot to the great voice den party that Dr. Terry Fisher threw, and kind of a bunch of stuff surrounding that. That was a fun time. I saw you were there. A lot of people
Yeah,
were there.
there were a lot. There were I think it was over 170 at least.
Yeah.
That's at one point. A lot of people. 2 hours. Just a lot of fun. It was you know a good experience, kind of like party that I haven't been to in a long time, uh experience, but it was good.
No, it was a fun time. How about you?
Oh, just keep working. I've got some big deadlines at work, getting some things done, and then I spend a little bit of time over the weekend trying to get this game that I'm trying to work on getting out, but trying to work on deployment to Lambda and kind of some system component type things. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and
And
was what
and and that dovetails nicely to what I think we want to talk about this
yeah.
week is the article you posted a few weeks ago about the system architecture for Number
Yeah, so
Spies.
number spice turned was originally a flash briefing that was going to then have uh, a voice Alexa skill with it, and right off the bat, because it was trying to mimic Number Station, I knew it needed to do some audio processing, so there needed to be some additional components that were brought into that, and then kind of at the end, taking a look back about all the things that went into it, turned into like a whole system, architecture, some back-end components and integrations and stuff, and it just turned into looking more like a enterprise software project than a voice game. But
Well, and I think one of the interesting things that I found while reading through the article, and you've got a great picture on it. On one sense, it seems like this big enterprise thing, but also how it breaks things down nicely and gets the right components to the right places, and that's what creates this nice multimedia holistic kind of game
mhm.
that you were working on.
Yeah, so go check out the article, and you can see specifically how it connects together for Number Spies. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. But let's talk about some of the integrations that we've
Yeah.
done on projects. Not necessarily just Number Spies, but other projects that we've worked on, whether it be things that are like built into the voice app, or things that are kind of in that whole ecosystem that go around the voice app that that helps make the experience better.
No, one of the things I think I found interesting, kind of as part of, and this was as part of Number Spies, was, now did I follow it correctly that you pre-generated the number sequences for the flash briefing each day, correct?
Yeah, so there's a content management system where I could enter in what my message was and give it a specific day that the message was going to be before. And so then there's a daily cron job that's a Lambda that runs in AWS that checks at 0 UTC if there is anything there for that day. If there's nothing for that day as far as a message, it generates a fake static kind of message. So if you tune into the Number Station on that day, then you just hear static. But if it is a message, then it goes through the process of generating the audio, which is it takes the message, encodes it, takes those numbers, generates a series of SSML that's processed through Poly, through some audio processing finally to an audio file, and because the flash briefing needs a feed
Mm-hmm.
JSON, then it also updates that feed JSON with the information, so that when you say, what's my flash briefing, then it goes ahead and pulls the information from that feed and the audio file that's associated with that.
Now I want to kind of focus on the CMS part for
Okay.
at least a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, because this is a topic you and I have had a few conversations around,
Yeah.
and I think it's one that I think a lot of voice developers really should be thinking more about as we're doing our development. So tell us a little bit about Spies was doing for a CMS, and then let's talk in general about CMSs.
Okay. So actually, when I first started with Spies, and also kind of my, in some of the other projects that I've done, when I've needed something where I've wanted to have information outside of the skill itself so it can change without having to redeploy, I've used things like a Google Sheet or Airtable, and those work great. They're solutions that are good on their own. But I was like,
and one of the things is great is that Jovo has direct support for those, right?
Yeah. So interestingly, kind of on the content management side of things, you've got the text to speech strings that are part of the responses. You can choose to have those in or out of a CMS. In this particular project, those are outside of a CMS. Those are just baked in. But there's other game components that are inside of a CMS, because those are the things that I wanted to change. But yes, there is integration. If you wanted to have those text-to-speech strings outside of your code and inside of a CMS, you could use a Jovo implementation for those. And there is Jovo connection for like a plugin for Airtable or a plugin for Google Sheets. Yeah.
And I'm kind of chuckling because you're talking of things in terms of in dialogue and out of dialogue elements. And I know that as I was working on Multivocal, which is a library to handle some of these things, my objective was kind of say, well, there is no in versus out. It's all configuration.
Right.
And you need to be able to put the configuration where you want it. And sometimes that means embedding it directly into the code. And sometimes that means putting it into something like a sheet or Airtable or Firebase Firestore or multiple ones, because some configurations make more sense in one place than another. So Multivocal is very much aimed at use any of the configuration modules wherever you want, however you want. It's all just configuration to Multivocal itself.
Yeah.
By the time it gets to the library, it doesn't matter where it came from. It's constantly updated automatically.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting approach to solving the problem. I think I kind of go back and forth. I've had projects where like this is way before Jovo had integration with a number of these things that I found what's called a headless CMS. It's a content management system where you can put in data and access it through an API, and then the head part is your website or your mobile app or wherever you want to consume that data. And so they call it headless because it's not baked in. Like a typical CMS would be like a WordPress or some of the ones that have been around for a long time, but the content was specifically tailored or meant to be shown in the web as opposed to headless. It's saying it doesn't matter where you're going to display this data. You're going to have some way of entering in this information and then access it via an API. But early on, I did do some text-to-speech strings and an approach for a university here in Arizona that was using Graph CMS. It's a headless CMS, and so all the TTS was in that. As opposed to Spies, I kept that TTS inside a JSON file inside my project, but the game content, I used a CMS, another headless CMS called sanity.io. So it's interesting, what you can find when you go out there and just find a CMS that works for you and decide, how you're going to use it. But I would highly recommend this CMS. It's been just really nice to be able to change some game components without having to recompile. And
yeah, no, and in fact, I'm kind of at the point where I recommend using CMS or some other external storage, just in general, because it makes it so easy to integrate and manage and so forth. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of external CMSs for all content, simply because one of the things I happened to me more than once is when I actually deploy it, the conversation elements sound a little off, and rather than have to redeploy the entire back end, I can just start fiddling with the text itself in the CMS to make sure it sounds correct. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I think the ability to tweak and to improve and to to move fast when you do that is one of the advantages of a CMS.
And and I think this is one thing that that we've it's not just a lesson that we've learned in the voice world. This is what we've learned from deploying web apps and deploying mobile apps and deploying all of these other things. Is this is the right way to do it, is to separate the text, the audio from the logic. And I think that's something designers really need to think about, is how are we separating the logic for all of these parts? Which I think also speaks to the rest of your architecture that you built here.
Yeah, so some of the other parts that I guess you might want to consider in different integrations is I've seen voice apps where you want to get information off to somebody. So maybe they've learned something from your voice app about your company, and you want to contact somebody at the company. You can either send them that contact an email or a text message, and so that would be something like a Twilio or a SendGrid that you could plug in. Or in the case of number spies, you can ask for information and it will email the player, and that's also a way of increasing engagement and retention by sending out periodic emails or being able to get access to some different information, and that just rounds out the user experience more.
No, one of the things I noticed Number Spies does is it's got the Facebook integration and the Twitter integration. You want to kind of talk a little bit about that in terms of how users were interacting with that and the audio element at the same time, or how they kind of fit into each other?
Yeah, so like a message starts off in a CMS for a given day, and then, like I said, the Lambda function that runs on a daily basis will turn that into a message and audio file and make that available for a flash briefing. But I also wanted the ability to have additional channels where I could engage the player, and one of those would be Facebook. So I wanted to be able to take that encoded message and post that on Facebook, so that that would be another place that they could see it, or they could copy the text from that, and there's a website where you could turn that series of numbers into the message, so that you could decode it right there on the website. So in order to do that integration, I used something called Zapier. Now, if you've used If This Then That or IFTTT before, Zapier is very similar to that, but in some cases it lets you do a lot more things. So I'm not sure if This Then That allows you to have a webhook, but in Zapier you can define just some webhook or API endpoint. So I can have my code call that API endpoint, which then triggers Zapier to do some things. And so then I'm able to pass in some information as part of that webhook that is the information that is the encoded message. So then Facebook can do a post. And then I had another Zapier integration that says, whenever I post this to Facebook, go ahead and take that link and post it or tweet it, so that there's another channel that you can access. So those are a couple of ways that you could use Zapier inside of your voice apps.
I think the big lesson there is, again, as we're developing our voice apps, is to realize we're not doing this in isolation. These, voice is a component of a bigger picture. And I think the converse is also true. As we're developing non-voice apps, we need to keep in mind how will voice fit into this? It's one of the things that I thought of a lot when I was working with Voodoo Drive, which is inherently, how do we deal with stuff that wasn't built for voice?
Right.
And how do we add a voice component to it? And there it was, okay, how do I make the connections with OAuth? And how do I make it so that when you're doing something in voice, it automatically gets reflected on the non-voice side and vice versa? And there it was easy. The rest of the system was already designed to handle that. But certainly if we're designing databases that we think are applying to just a narrow channel, they may not be. And we need to keep in mind that, I may be, entering something in my phone and then switch to voice and then switch back to the phone. And
Yeah.
I think, and I think we need to keep these elements in mind.
Yeah, because I think we're going to see more and more of that. The fact that you're going to be able to carry the same experience or start an experience, continue it, 20 minutes later in the car, or when you get home on the big screen, your TV. There's on your phone. There's just going to be different ways. If voice is going to be ambient, then you need to be able to carry on the whole, like some cohesive usage of it throughout a day across multiple devices.
And I think our systems are at the point where we can do that. So we've got tools like Firebase and Firestore, which are real-time databases that essentially, if you make a change in them, they automatically go out to everywhere that's subscribing to that change. So if I'm making a change in voice, I can see it immediately reflected on my mobile device or on a desktop or on a web interface that's subscribing to the same part of the database. And I think that's a really powerful set of tools, that real-time notion. Not just, I can make a query to the database and, because of eventual consistency, at some point in the next hour or so, my databases will all be in sync. I think with voice, we really need to focus on that real-time component for it.
Yeah, well, just imagine something like, I don't know, garage door technicians, and they have a voice assistant in their car. They could say, I've arrived at this location, and it could be through an integration like you just described, a dashboard at corporate headquarters that now you know exactly where that person is, that they're ready at the next client site or something. And that's a very, easy integration. That's totally possible today with a voice app on your phone or in the car. And then integration with a dashboard on a website or something.
Right. Well, and I think actually the other point is that dashboard could be on a website, it could be on an app, it could be on a notification that gets triggered and either goes to a mobile device or to a voice device. It could be a voice query or an audio dashboard.
Could be. Yep.
It could be the big display that's sitting up, in the lobby at headquarters. There's all sorts of ways that the data can be presented. We just want to make sure it gets out in as close to real time as we can. And traditional tools didn't really let us do that. And tools such as Firebase and Firestore, and to some extent, DynamoDB and other tools like that, let us be closer to real time than we were before.
Yeah, no, that's totally. And there's some of the additional systems that I've used in AWS that could be used for notifications would be something like EventBridge. I've had something inside of a voice app before where I want it to notify something or kick off some other process. It's something that's asynchronous. It's not something that I need back in the 7 seconds that I have in my round trip of my conversation, but I can very quickly trigger one or more events on EventBridge and have it, do some stuff that I can check back on later, or that's used in another part of the system.
Yeah, exactly. But also doing these sorts of things also imposes you need to rethink some of our approaches sometimes. So, you use AWS Lambda a lot, and I use Google Cloud Functions a lot, they're very similar.
Yeah.
But the biggest notion about both of them is you're not guaranteed which instance of that you're going to get to. So if there's data that you need to save, it needs to be saved outside of the instance itself.
Right.
So you either need to make sure you put it into a data store of some sort and have a good reference to it. Or in Google's case, we can store it as part of the session data. But either way, we need to make sure it's available out there, which means maybe we need to implement something like a memcache somewhere so we can pull the most current data in quickly.
Yep.
And it changes the architecture and how we need to think about it.
Yeah, definitely a lot simpler than the very basic, this is how you create a skill example. You start thinking about these other things, and it definitely that blossoms. Yeah.
And I think that's important for us as developers to realize as we're going through it is, yeah, that nice simple example is good for a hello world. But when we start creating things like Number Spies or Voodoo Drive or serious applications that we expect to be used in a wide variety of places, we need to think about these sorts of things more.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the interesting integration also that I've needed to do with Number Spies was audio manipulation. Now, some of this stuff probably could be used now with the new APL for audio functionality, because what I needed to do is I needed to have Polly read off a series of numbers. I had already some audio files for like an intro and outro music. And then I had an audio file which was various static, like on radio. So in order to combine all those together, that I used a tool called FFmpeg, which is just well, what the implementation I ended up doing was with Lambda. You can do something called a now I'm shooting. I'm losing what I'm thinking about. A layer, Lambda layer. Thank you. So you can add a Lambda layer, which would be some code that gets deployed along with your Lambda function, and it's just there. And what it is it's some other process. FFmpeg is just its own process. You could do it as a console, but you could trigger code from your Lambda to actually spawn off that child process and then do processing audio. And then you've got a temp folder on your Lambda that you can do processing on, and then grab the file back out of that.
So it's another, I hadn't known about Lambda layer. So it's basically it's a way to execute a program that also got installed along with your code.
Yeah, so what you can do is you can, instead of having to somehow package up FFmpeg with your Lambda and deploy that as part of the zip when you deploy your Lambda, you can define a Lambda layer and associate it with the Lambda function. And it's just there. It's kind of like it marries the Lambda layers in with whatever your Lambda function is, and it's just there. So you could pre-deploy certain libraries or modules or files in a Lambda layer and just have them available. In some cases, like in this case, FFmpeg, and it's fairly easy to do, and you can usually find some libraries that people have already done. There's a marketplace on AWS where you can find Lambda layers that you can include in, and so I found FFmpeg. There's another library for audio processing called SOX, SOX, and I actually use both of those because in some cases it was easier. The syntax was easier for FFmpeg to do, but then I also wanted to be able to like trim the audio to a certain length, and that was a lot easier in SOX. So that's why I chose that library. But
well, and I think that what the lesson that always reminds me of is pick the right tool for the job.
Yep.
It's just because when you and I got started with this, how much did you know about Lambda at all?
I didn't know anything about I didn't know anything about AWS when I got started in 2016. So
and yet that was the right tool for the job, and you learned it, and so I think developers shouldn't be afraid to learn these new tools that are out there. And certainly, AWS has an incredibly rich variety of tools as part of the ecosystem, which can help you do things far easier.
Yep.
Google Cloud, same thing, not quite as many, but there's many things that are already out there and already built, and you might as well take advantage of them. I mean, one of the things I really enjoy about working in Google's environment is just being able to say, well, Google's been using PubSub for a decade, and now we can too. So it's this really easy way to just send something out. And again, in the same way that the Elastic Bridge is, send something out, and eventually it'll end up at the right spot. I don't need to worry about the time sensitivity of it.
Yeah, no, and another note on the audio processing, because I had the idea for Number Spies, more than a year before I actually started putting code out on it. I knew that there was going to need to be some sort of audio processing, but I had no idea how to do it. And it really wasn't until a series of events where I finally worked on something at a project at work that did audio processing. I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. That I finally learned enough. I'm like, okay, now I can start this because I know what it takes. I can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Whereas before it was like, this is a cool idea. I have no idea how I'm going to do this.
And this is the sort of place where I think we get to plug the community, because it's very easy to not know where you need to do something.
Yeah.
Reach out to other people and say, here's what I need to do. Is there a tool that does this? Because I've searched and I can't find one, or I don't know what the best one is. There are lots of people out there that have been down this road that are happy to say, oh yeah, you need FFmpeg for that, or yeah, that's a tough one. There's no good solution right now.
Yeah, so no, that's true, and I think the voice community has been a great community to be involved in, but I've also just recently started plugging in and getting notifications from some of the different accounts on Twitter that are for AWS, and I like when there's a new release of something on AWS. I look through there. I'm like, oh, something from DynamoDB. How is that going to improve what I do for voice? Or, oh, they've got something new for Lambda. That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm very much the same way when it comes to Firebase and Google. Is every so often they're releasing stuff, and I'm like, so what is this Firebase? This change to Firebase Analytics. Oh, that I've wanted to do that for years, and I can oh, this database does that. Great.
That's cool. And then you hit a situation where you realize this would be a perfect solution for a problem as you come across it.
Yeah, no, so yeah, definitely tap into those different communities. Because sometimes voice can get a bit insular, can't we?
Yeah, it can, definitely. I'm excited. One of the other implementations that I'm doing is a game I'm currently working on. And I've using this.
You keep teasing this game, and
I know it is.
So looking forward to this.
I've really been working hard. I was trying to get to a point this weekend where I could deploy everything with serverless on Lambda, and for some reason my file sizes are too big when I unzip on the Lambda side of things, which I don't know why that is, but my goal is to get things out. Was to get something out this week so I could start getting you, Alan, on, and a couple of other people on beta tests for it. But I really want to get this done before December so I can get this out and released on multiple platforms. But anyway, behind the scenes, I use something. It's a software as a service offering that I've known about since 2016. It was one of the early prototypes I was working on. It was a company called PlayFab, and then eventually Microsoft bought them. But it is it allows you to do some of the same content management stuff, but for games. Specifically for games, it's got leaderboards, it's got user creation, it's got a number of different things in it. I've created a plugin for this game, and my intention is that I'll release the plugin once I get some things ironed out for it. But allows you to create characters and keep weekly leaderboards. So that's going to be something that's part of this game. So if you haven't checked out PlayFab yet, then I encourage you to do that.
That just went on my list. Thank you for that. And actually, that's a good point. We just talked about Google and Microsoft, Google and Amazon. Microsoft has a lot of good stuff out there specifically for developers and for developer integrations. And you've got Git there, and what you were just talking about, and they've got their whole Azure platform. So I think there's a lot there for developers to look at as well.
Yeah, and I come from many decades of Microsoft programming experience. I was primarily programming on C# for years, and I know you can create Lambda functions with C#, or you could. I've also known of libraries where you can run your backend code on Azure and do Alexa skills. So you don't necessarily have to relearn a completely new stack. It seemed like it made the most sense for me when I started in 2016, but there are a lot more choices available today that you can take carry what languages and experience that you know into creating voice
Right.
apps on.
And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind is, you know, we're building on the tools that we already know largely. You know, it's
Yep.
one thing I like to emphasize a lot of is, you know, if you already know JavaScript, hey, there's a place for you here. And if you don't know JavaScript and you code in some other language, that's okay. There's a place for you here.
Yeah, you primarily code in Java. I know that you can code in C#. I know that you can code in Python to create these voice apps. There's even stuff that I've heard that you can use Go if you're wanting to use something that's you know, newer and kind of more along the lines of C or C++. So,
you know, I think the important bit is, you know, if there are components out there that you know and are familiar with, and that meet your needs, use them. By all means, they'll work. And if there are components that you aren't familiar with but you need, they're out there and you can find them.
yeah, I sometimes just spend time going through you know, npm.js and just looking through some different, you know, packages that are available, just kind of, you know, querying different things to see, just to, you know, see what's out there, or also just GitHub, just kind of exploring, doing keyword searches on GitHub to see what's out there on different projects. It's just fun to explore out there and see what's available and how you might be able to use those.
Okay. So what's coming up next in the articles?
Oh, let's see what else is coming up. Some more specific stuff on content management system, like how I use Sanity IO to go ahead and design the different components, whether they be transmissions or cities or missions or trips or all kinds of things. So yeah, that's something that's coming up soon in the article series.
Excellent. Looking forward to reading it.
All right. Well, let us know, you know, out there how we can help you, or if you got something cool that you want to share that's that we may not know about as far as integrations or libraries, then let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
Indeed, we would. You can find us on Twitter, plenty of other places. Remember, we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, everyone.
Have a good week.